The word emotion is a big part of being able to control your feelings and your emotions when you're in the moment. But I challenge all of you to power up your social capital by thinking about it as emotional agility.
The rule of 3 R's. R stands for rules, results, and relationship, which we don't find on your LinkedIn or social media.
Absolutely. I think back to one of my highlights in my career, and this was at Sony Pictures International. And then the next day I tell all my friends, I'm going to Hollywood. And that was like so exciting.
Hello and welcome to Mentorship Masterminds, a podcast where we deep dive into the world of leadership, networking, and professional development. I'm your host Mahesh Deshpande, and I'm thrilled to bring this captivating podcast series where we will be talking to industry leaders and seasoned mentors, try to understand their stories, unravel their stories, and learn from their experience. In today's episode, we will be talking to Carin Kaltschmidt on the topic of how to power up your social capital. Carin is a management consulting executive, has been a partner at Ernst & Young, is on a board of directors for a couple of schools, and has an MBA from Hult University. She's also an actor, but her passion lies in developing and helping next generation leaders. I'm thrilled to have Carin on this podcast for the topic of powering up your social capital. Carin, welcome to Mentorship Masterminds.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you, Mahesh. I know we've known each other for a couple years as we've had an opportunity to get to know each other in working at the PMI organization.
Absolutely. So at PMI San Francisco chapter, where we have been working for over 2 years, guess what Carin is leading? She is leading our Next Generation Leaders program, which partners with universities in the Bay Area to bring up the best of the bright minds from these top universities. So Carin, thrilled once again to have you on this show.
Thank you. Well, as you mentioned, I lead the Next Generation Leaders program at the PMI organization. And why do I do that? I love working with people. As I had an opportunity to be a partner in consulting services at EY, I worked with a lot of different individuals, very diverse, and a lot of folks from universities starting out their career. And so what I'm really passionate about is continuing that through universities across the San Francisco Bay Area.
Can you talk to us? We want to talk today about social capital, but before getting into social capital, can you are a mentor, you are a seasoned leader who is an inspiration to many of our next generation leaders. Can you talk about what drives you, what motivates you, something that keeps you up, that drives you totally?
Well, when you talk about what drives me, I had to think about this for a minute earlier when I was preparing for this podcast, and I think 3 things that really come to mind. One is serving others. As a servant leadership, I really enjoy working with people to counsel them, to teach them, and really be able to see an impact in their lives. And also, I really believe in lifelong learning. I went to school earlier before my career, and then following my career, I went back to school. And went to Hult International Business School, which was very diverse. And here I was back to studying after so many years. And I loved it. And now, through that learning, I gained a passion for working with other universities, hence the Next Generation Leaders program.
Awesome. Is there something to you that we don't see on your LinkedIn profile, something that you want to talk about, which we don't find on your LinkedIn or social media?
Absolutely. I think back to one of my highlights in my career, and this was in program management, but I got an opportunity to work in crisis management, which really taps into all of your skills, both on the practical side, but also on the psychology side. And this was at Sony Pictures International. And I remember one day I was sitting in the snow-bound area in the middle of Illinois at Caterpillar. And I was having dinner with someone talking about, I really wish I could be on an account working in the media and entertainment, because that was really my passion. The phone rings. It's someone that was part of my social capital that I had been nurturing that relationship to say, we have an opportunity to immediately step into Sony Pictures because there's been a cybersecurity hack that has shut down the whole entire company. And I remember thinking, I am totally on board with this. And then the next day I tell all my friends, I'm going to Hollywood. And that was like so exciting. And being at Sony Pictures, again, there was a lot of anxious people, and working directly with the CIO and all of his direct reports was a privilege and an ability to be the calm among the storm, because there certainly was a storm going on.
Awesome. And since then, there is no looking back.
No looking back, and so then I can say I work in Hollywood or sometimes Silicon Valley, and that gets a lot of people's attention.
Absolutely. Carin, today's topic is about social capital. We want to discuss about how our next generation leaders can empower their social capital, power up their social capital. But I'm sure many in the audience haven't even heard the word. So can you define what social capital is for our audience?
Social capital is a word that is being used more often now, and it's really about the result of the relationships that you build up both in your professional as well as your personal life. When we think about social capital, it's the resources that you can tap into for opportunities, to get advice, and also a way to help others. And this is what I refer to as social capital.
Cool. And you have been a leader across organizations. You have experience volunteering with PMI as well as in your professional life. How do you see social capital? What's the significance of social capital? Does it really help you in your career growth?
So in social capital, I also want to emphasize about networking because they're really two different things. And this ties back into being in your profession. At Ernst & Young as a partner, folks would ask me, how do I network? And when you network, it's the process of building up your social capital. And why would you want to do that? Well, in the professional world, you don't know all the answers. And at times, you need to be able to tap into people that can either give you insights, give you counsel, or actually help you in your professional challenge that you have. Or even sometimes you're bringing them in to team and collaborate on a challenge that you both have a lot of passion for.
Interesting. So clearly this is important, and social capital is called the most valuable currency today, right? And you're talking about connections. As a leader or as a next gen leader, how do we go about it? How do we make these social connections that are authentic and build meaningful relationship?
To develop your social capital, you kind of start with one person, and someone that you may have been in school with, someone that you may work with, and you start to have a reciprocal relationship. How can you help this person? In EY, we used to call it giving a gracious act, which is your generosity in helping another person, even perhaps elevating their social capital. Like, for example, on LinkedIn, which is a platform that we use in the professional world to enable ability to capture all your network connections. Someone may post something, but if you just like it, it doesn't have as much impact if you were to comment on it and perhaps emphasize the power of what this person commented on, or even reposting it. You have, at that point in time, enabled some gracious acts towards your social capital. And that stands out, and other people see you do that as well.
Absolutely. Carin, you have been a leader in management consulting. You have held various leadership roles in non-profit organization. How do the connections, do you have any stories to share of how meaningful connections influence one in their career?
Sure. The way I think about it is that when you build your social capital, you never know when you're going to need to use them. And I say that in leveraging, because you have access to these relationships that you've created and fostered and nurtured over time. And in the aspect of using them in the professional world, I think back to an example of actually at the PMI organization. In starting up the next generation leaders, the Let's Jam, we needed to recruit coaches. And so I thought back to my social connections and identified some people that I had helped in the past through mentoring, through promotions of their career. And so I reached out to them because I knew they liked to help and support others, to see if they would be willing to step in as a volunteer to be a coach for the next generation leaders. And just so happened that they were very positive in wanting to join this, and were excited that I actually had thought about them.
That's an interesting experience, and we have so many stories to share from our PMI volunteering experience. So clearly, social capital is the most valuable currency, they say, in today's world, right? And you stressed about how to establish connections, how to build connections, and your experience with the NGL program. If I know that social capital is important, how do I build these meaningful connections? How do I go about it?
So to build your social capital, it starts with the people around you, the people that you know. And if you're using I use the LinkedIn platform to stay connected, because people move around from different professions, and that's the best way to connect with them. But you really need to be authentic. And the way I look at it is, how can you help them? And it can be as simple as reaching out to them to let them know about an impact that they made on your life and really thanking them for it. Like, gratitude is a big part of fostering your social capital. Also, to be a bit more proactive, I remember when I worked at KPMG, my boss who mentored me, I had to do sales. And I was intimidated because sales, I have to talk to people I don't know and ask for money for our services. That seemed to be something that really was going to be hard to do. And what my boss at the time, his name was Arnold, he said, all right, here's how you're going to do it. You build relationships, and then people begin to trust you. So every week we had to pick 3 new people we were going to talk to and connect with, and then have another 3 people we're going to need to connect to. And sometimes it may be the same person to connect to as well. And then the last bit of advice I would give there is, when you're building a network, people that are in your network have a network, and you can ask them to introduce you to someone else that they know. And that way you can expand your network without having to just reach out to people you don't know.
That's powerful. Can you also talk about what not to do? Now that we know what to do, or what are some of the tips that you shared on what to do, what are some of the things to avoid? What are the pitfalls that one should focus on, that we don't go this path?
Yeah, there are a number of things I've done myself is like connect with people you don't know just because I can have a lot of connections.
Yep.
And it's really the quality of your connections versus the quantity. because you're going to need to foster those relationships. And if there's 100 people, you're not going to have enough time in the day to connect and have meaningful relationships with people. And one thing also in consulting that I've learned, and even in my personal life, is that when you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. If you're going to help someone and you've committed to doing that, you need to follow through on that, because that builds this reciprocal relationship. People are counting on you. It builds loyalty. And if you flake on that, then it's not forgotten. It's really hard to build back credibility. Now, it's okay if something comes up and you communicate it effectively and maybe come up with an alternative solution to that, but that's a really important aspect. And then lastly, again, offering to help other people and making that commitment. That's more of a thing to do, but if you fail on that commitment and don't follow up, that again is an aspect that's really not going to work well in your favor.
Yeah, so focus on quality over quantity and have a good say-to-do ratio. That's the gist of it, right? Like, whatever you say, you do it. Maintain a good, I think it's called say-to-do ratio. So, great inputs. These are critical. These are definitely important, but it's easier said than done when it comes to networking. It comes easy for some who are extroverts, or some who have been in the industry, say in the same, who are comfortable with their environment. Mm-hmm. But what about introverts? What about people who are new to certain situations? Say I moved to a new city, right? Building a social capital there can be challenging. Do you have some tips on how we can go about it? How can introverts focus on building up their social capital, or when even extroverts for that matter, when you are in a new environment, new surrounding, new industry, how do you break the ice and focus on your social capital?
Well, one of the things I would say that there are strengths that, say, introverts or shy people have, and that is the ability to actively listen. Mm. And when you meet people, it's a matter of focusing on being in the moment and also listening to what they have to say. Because I will have to say that people love to talk about themselves. That's true. And when you are listening and asking insightful questions, they recognize that you get them and that you're generally interested. And as an introvert, often we process. I'm an extrovert, but as an introvert, I understand they process information, but you can do your homework. When you're going to meet someone, you can look up their information on LinkedIn, ask someone else that knows them to learn something about their profession or things that they like to do. So when you actually meet them, you have let them know that you've invested in understanding a little bit about them. Now, often it can be intimidating to meet someone for the first time. So sometimes when you go to someone to ask for advice, perhaps it's on, I'm in school and I'm not sure the direction that I want to go in for this particular career. When you go speak with someone, maybe in the retail business, to ask them about how they got to where they were, it's another way to build a connection. And plus you're learning and they feel good about being able to share their experiences with you. And then before you leave, make sure you ask them to introduce you to someone else they know. Mm. And that way you can begin to build and get information that's going to help you succeed too.
This is great. I echo your sentiments. I've seen the same in my experience, where when I go in networking events, people love to talk about themselves. So this is valuable advice. This is golden. Thank you for sharing. So now let's switch gears.
Okay.
And I want to talk about networking through or building your social capital through social media. Mm-hmm. We are connected in this digital world. We have people on LinkedIn, Facebook, Insta, in other tools that you can think of, TikTok for that
Right,
matter.
I like that.
How do one harness this power of social media to boost up their social capital?
The way I would think about what I would call power up your brand on social media, first of all, you need to take a step back and think about what is it that I want to present to the world. This is really what we call branding.
Yeah.
And there's personal branding that also applies to your profession. So there are techniques, and I would advise folks to look into that a little bit, but just to give you some tips in this podcast, it's looking at if you were to put a headline in the newspaper about yourself, what would that look like? If I think about myself personally, talk about being a management consultant, but I also say I'm an actor because I have a fond passion for doing that. When I was at EY, people would ask, why are you doing that? I said, I'm acting every day when I have to go out there and sell or counsel someone, but in a positive way. I'm not faking it. I'm just adjusting myself to the situation. Kind of like improv as well. But also, just we work in a hybrid world today, and whether you call it social media or really being online, make yourself known, like be on camera, be dressing the part, be sure you have the right technology where people can hear your voice. They see your background, just even what you wear, all reflects your brand. And have some fun, in the process. I like to think about a job and doing my hobby. I learned this term from this Hertz driver that was giving me a ride to the airport, and he had retired, and I said, why are you doing this? He said, this is my jobby. I'm doing my hobby and talking with people as well as my job. And so from then on, I'm like, yes, I love that. I'm looking for my jobby myself.
That's cool. Jobby. Your statement about what to put on social media reminded me of an incident. While I was at my MBA in my grad school, I had just finished an interview and I was a bit disappointed because it didn't go well. Mm-hmm. And I was just sitting on a bench and a person walked by who I didn't know at that time who he was. And he asked me about the same thing, like, why are you disappointed? And I said, I think I didn't do well in my interview. And he said, think about yourself as a product and try to sell. Mm-hmm. And it stuck with me. Since then, it has been my mantra, right? And when I hear like this, it reminded me of that incident. I later Googled who the person was. He was the CEO of GoDaddy, who was there on campus I think he was an alumni and he was just visiting campus. But that stuck with me, and I think that reminded me when you said, like, when you are putting things on LinkedIn, be selective about what you put, and it's basically the same thing, right? You are a product and you want to showcase the best version of yourself. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a story. So this was a volunteer who I met through PMI, who was interested in getting a job, and I was working at EY, and he was really very interested in wanting to work at EY. So through the social capital network, I was able to get him an interview there. Well, when he did the interview, he did terrible, and so he was really bummed. And the feedback was that I think he was very nervous and was giving answers he thought they wanted to hear, but they really wanted him to be authentic. And so through the social capital, in connecting with me, is that I knew the folks that interviewed him, and I asked them to give him a second chance. That he was like super nervous. I stick my neck out for him, knowing that he could really do the job, and they did give him a second chance, and he did get the job.
That's powerful.
And so that, I think, sometimes people will extend through your social capital the ability to really help you, even when you do your worst,
Yeah.
it can be turned around.
You get second chances
Right.
because if you have a strong social capital.
Exactly.
Perfect. Carin, I would like to now deep dive into some of the nuances associated with social capital. I want to talk about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a pivotal skill to develop and nurture. What role does emotional intelligence play in powering up your social capital?
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because the word emotion is a big part of being able to control your feelings and your emotions when you're in the moment. But I challenge all of you to power up your social capital by thinking about it as emotional agility, which is taking it to the next level. And what do I mean by that? Well, emotional agility is to be able to read the room and also be able to read that person. They have a different communication style than you. So perhaps you're like an extrovert like myself and can be a bit assertive, and you're meeting with someone that is more deep thinking, kind of thinks about things in an analytical way. So emotional agility is being able to have self-awareness of who you are and also of who they are. And so that when you have this interaction, your goal is to develop a deeper connection with them, and by treating them the way that they feel most comfortable. And so you become a person that has to adapt, but you're still being genuine, because you are giving them a gift by treating them the way that they feel most comfortable. And that way, they begin to feel like you get me, you understand me, and that's how you will be able to power up your social capital.
Great. Emotional agility. So, switching gears, let's talk about cultural nuances, right? People come from different culture, and when we are networking, when we are trying to build our social capital, where different cultures play different aspects in terms of building your social capital. So what role do you think culture plays in developing social capital? Also, if there are any gaps, how do you bridge the gap across cultures?
I really believe in diversity, and in fact, I went to Holt International Business School, and it was 95% of students that were from all across the world. And I really love that, because there's different cultures, there's different food, there's different ways that they go about communicating. And by building a network that has this diversity, there's so much more insight that can be drawn, especially here in Silicon Valley, where being an entrepreneur and coming up with new innovative ideas, the collection of diversity really hones in on that. Now, how do you best power up and increase your social capital with this diversity? One, you need to understand cultures. You need to understand, how do people interact? What are some of the specific signs that you see in terms of maybe how people dress, how people speak, how they interact? And I'll give you an example. When I was working at Cisco, there was Diwali, which is such a wonderful, as you know, holiday.
Yeah.
And so we had a whole team there, and we were mainly from the US, but they were going to have a big party for the day. So we all decided we really wanted to dress up in authentic Indian outfits and partake in the festivities. And so there was one gal who had tons of outfits, and so we were all getting dressed up and having a good time. And it was amazing how, by just going through connecting with the people around us, as we sort of walked in the door, it was sort of like this big fashion statement, if you will. It was fun. But we were being authentic, because we were really, excited and happy to do this. And it really further developed that relationship, because we sort of understood and were comfortable in partaking in a holiday we hadn't experienced before. We even got up on the dance floor and we're learning some new moves through the music. And this was in a business setting, but it certainly deepened our relationships.
Interesting story. Amazing. Your story reminded me of an interaction I had with one of my seniors from grad school. He's an American settled in India, and he was talking to me about cultural differences, right? The example that you gave at Cisco. So he told me rule of 3 R's. R stands for rules, results, and relationship. So his name is David. He's a professor now in Bombay, and he said rules, results, and relationship. In American context, when you think about these 3, right, what comes first? What is of the highest priority, right? Probably rules, followed by results, followed by relationship. But when it comes to Asian context, or say in India, right, what do people cherish most? Relationship, followed by results, then rules, right? So it's how the dynamics change. And he said in a funny way that we need to be aware of these cultural differences, cultural nuances when you are trying to network and build social capital. So I just wanted to share this experience. Your example at Cisco reminded me of that.
I think this is a takeaway and a learning for me. I really think it's very concise and a good way to think about it, and help remind us about cultural differences and how others may want to be treated. Because again, building deeper relationships is treating other people the way they're most comfortable operating.
Absolutely. So now, one of the challenges is we discussed about obstacles and how to overcome cultural differences, how to overcome different personality types. One new challenge with the pandemic, and now with everyone being comfortable on Zoom calls, joining virtually in a remote setting, establishing those bonds, those relationships becomes more challenging when you are in a virtual environment, when you're working with teams which are spread across the world and which you are mostly interacted with in a virtual setting and not in in-person interaction. How do we go about developing that relationship? How do we go about powering up our social capital in a virtual environment?
Well, in today's world, we're moving into this hybrid. Although some companies are asking everyone to come back to work, still, I do believe that the virtual environment, especially if you work for a global company, this is just going to become the norm to work virtually. One of the things I've started to notice is being on Zoom is that people are no longer on their cameras. And I would encourage you, if you are looking to enhance your brand, boost your social capital, is being present there on Zoom in your audio, in your camera. And by the way, make sure you have good technology so when you do speak, people can hear you. I've seen situations where you have this cell phone moving. It's hard to develop a more lasting relationship if you're not making a commitment to be present. And one thing that someone recommended to me is we forgot how to use the phone. Is that sometimes it's making a phone call, not just texting, but actually calling someone. The other day I called someone and they went, "Oh, this is something it's been a long time since anyone actually called me on the phone." And again, it's being present and in the moment, and that you're giving your full attention to that one person. That can also help boost. You don't necessarily need to be in the same room.
Okay, makes sense. So being present in the situation, being present and giving your fullest, even in virtual environment, makes an impact towards powering up the social capital.
Right, and one thing I see a pitfall too is that sometimes people dominate on Zoom. And we have our introverts or we have our folks that are shy. If you are a person that's looking to set an example as a leader, also that helps boost your social capital by recognizing it and giving them room to speak. And there's different ways by asking questions, not putting them on the spot, but asking them for their thoughts. What do you think about what we're talking about? Also, it's like that inclusiveness is another part of diversity and also being able to really bring teams together.
I guess leaders also have to play a part where they encourage introverts to showcase themselves on Zoom calls and bring themselves and speak out. I guess that plays a role as well.
Well, and I know in doing roundtables, it's also like a forum where you can have everybody speak. One of the things as a leader I found, because I'm an extrovert, and sometimes I might have very strong opinions, is that in my teams that I applied my emotional agility to not speak first. When someone would ask me a question, what do you think I said? I would turn it around and say, what do you think? Because they actually had a lot of good insight. And I would be the last to speak. And probably by chance, someone would come up with an idea of what I was going to say. But sometimes they'd actually come up with something even better. And so it gave them the opportunity to be heard, which people like to be heard.
This is powerful. I'm going to use it. What do you think? I like it.
And I had someone give me some feedback that said, wow, you really want to know what I think?
Yeah.
And I said, yes. And maybe they got 95%, and you could add on to it. Like you were saying, oh yeah, that sounds good, that sounds good. Maybe this one you might want to, put to the side and maybe switch it up. But then they really feel more skin in the game, more connected to you, and heard. People like to feel heard.
Absolutely. So, Carin, we are coming to the end of the podcast. I have last few questions, and I want to ask you about authenticity. Building up social capital, now we know what social capital is and the importance, and you shared so many examples on why we need to focus on social capital. How do we bring authenticity to these relationships? How do we bring authenticity to the interactions? Do you want to share some thoughts on that?
I believe, and I think I said this early on, is being generous, being able to give first. When you're building a reputation of serving others and helping them through their struggles, helping them through a transition, helping to boost their social capital, this is all generosity, and it is definitely seen as being authentic. At the same time, don't do something because you want to get something back, because that can seem self-serving, but being really authentic and generous with your time is really important. And I think also just having a positive attitude. We talk about this growth mindset, and if you really have a growth mindset in mind, by having sort of that emotional agility, recognizing others, but also recognizing who you are and where you want to get to, being very intentional about how you're going to build your social capital through networking.
Powerful thing. Do you think social capital also helps the networking, the network that we do, authentic networks that we build, helps us in career growth? They say that who you know is as important as what you know. So from a career growth perspective, how far does social capital play a role?
I think that's a really good question. And being in consulting, especially being put in front of clients that expect the world from you, we as an individual, we don't know everything. We maybe ask questions, and sometimes I've asked questions, I'm like, oh no, I'm supposed to know the answer. But what I always would refer to is that, well, I don't know the answer, so I'm being authentic, I'm being truthful, but I know who does. And because I had built up my network of individuals and I knew who they were, I knew their talents, I knew their strengths, that I could reach into my social capital and touch base with those folks, and also know when I would have an ask of them that they would respond. Because if you haven't invested in your social capital, then the results are not really going to be there.
Powerful. So this is my last question to you, Carin. If we, for our audience, for our next generation leaders, from this discussion, if there are any key insights, right? Top 3 key insights which they can take away from this podcast. What are some of the key insights that you would like to share?
So I know that developing your social capital through networking can be intimidating. So first of all, there are maybe 3 things that I would encourage you to do, and you can even start doing that today, is on your LinkedIn profile to really evaluate it and maybe get opinions from others that you trust about how to really polish it up. And then that really sets the tone for who you want to project out into the world. The second one I would say is if you know someone that is a great networker and that has built some good social capital, set up a time with them to learn all you can from them. How did they go about doing it? What worked for them? What didn't work for them? And take the courage to ask them if there's someone that they can introduce you to further expand your network. And if someone else may be struggling, helping others and serving others to help promote their social capital would also be another way to really enhance your reputation and start to build up sort of that bank, if you would, of your social capital.
Absolutely. Carin, thank you so much for being our guest for the inaugural episode of Mentorship Masterminds. I learned a lot. I learned quite a new things about social capital, about emotional intelligence, as well as how about helping others to grow your social capitals. Thank you so much once again for being part of the podcast.
Yeah, it's been really fun, and this is my first podcast, so I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be able to participate, and I learned so much, and I'm going to take away these 3 R's, which have to do with relationships, with results, and with rules, especially when we're thinking about cultural aspects that's so important in today's world in diversity, inclusiveness, and equity.
Thank you so much. For me, emotional agility was the one key highlight. I'm going to ensure I use it in my everyday life. So thank you, Carin. Thank you once again for being on the podcast. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Mentorship Masterminds. We have quite a few interesting topics related to empathetic leadership, program management, pivoting into technical project management, and a lot of topics, interesting topics coming your way. So tune in, share the podcast with your friends and family on YouTube and other channels, and looking forward to having you on another episode of Mentorship Masterminds with me, your podcast host, Mahesh Deshpande. Until then, keep inspiring and keep thriving. Thank you.